Hey, good morning, folks. This is Stan Scrabbit, and welcome to Extension Technology Roundtable with your host, me, and Jerry Butchko. This is a weekly program where we examine various technologies in extension. Today, we have Bob Bertsch from North Dakota State University, and really excited because our topic is on podcasting, and Bob's been leading the way in extension. So welcome, everybody. And hey, how are things going? Jerry, what's going on with you?
Not much. Well, this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm gearing up for the AFCPE conference in a couple weeks. So that's where a lot of my attention's been, and I'm kind of really looking forward to that. So
nice. And I want to welcome Bob. Bob and I, we do another show, What's Up, Joe? And thank you very much for coming on here and talking about podcasting. What's going up in North Dakota right now?
Same old. It's Friday. I'm a little bit punchy. We had a communications camp all week, and so I'm pretty loose right now. I've been on for 3 days, so you guys might have the 7-second delay ready in case anything slips.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We'll just let it go.
All right.
Hey, just before we get started, just want to remind folks that in the upper right-hand corner of your viewing screen, we have a Q&A. So if you have any questions that you want to ask Bob, please do so. And also, there's a showcase of a couple links that Bob has shared with us, and they will definitely be in the show notes afterwards. So, hey, but let's get started. So Bob runs this podcast that I enjoy listening to, and it's Working Differently in Extension. Bob, how'd you get started with this thing? Why did you decide to go launch a podcast?
Well, it's kind of a two-part story. Well, and your question was sort of a two-part question, so that's probably apt that that's a two-part answer. Getting started, I actually got started just a few years ago. I had a colleague, Julie Keel, here at North Dakota State University. We were both titled web technology specialists, and so we're really tasked with letting people know about new technologies, helping them get started in new technologies and things like that. And so we thought it might be a good way to talk about things that we weren't really training on or weren't sort of official tools that we were talking about, but just sort of what's going on in technology and what we're interested in, those kinds of things. And it was a little bit easier than blogging. Blogging involves all this writing and sometimes editing and thinking about things, and podcasting sometimes can be just let's pop open a microphone and have a conversation. So it was a little bit easier to get started doing it that way. We did that for about a year, and then Julie left NDSU, and so I was like, well, now I'm by myself. What am I going to do with this thing? I can't just ramble on and on. And so what I decided, well, you guys know that I can ramble on and on if given the opportunity. It's just no one wants to listen to it. But I decided that maybe it'd be good to, instead of enlisting another host or doing it that way, to do it interview style. And I've got some background in that. I spent about 15 years in public media, public television, public radio. So it was a comfort zone for me. And so I started to line up these people, and I think our first interview was the then E-Extension director, Dan Cotton, the first Working Differently in Extension interview podcast that we did. And then I just, I was hearing about all this stuff that was going on, people doing exciting things, some people that I was already connected with, like Ann Adrian and Kevin Gamble and Steve Judd and people like that. But also people that, hey, I had no idea. People that maybe run into a conference, or I had a lot of friends give me names. Hey, you should really talk to Jenny Reese from the University of Nebraska. And, it's sort of one of those things where you get into your own little bubble in terms of the people that you interact with. And you guys know, because you're sort of part of that group, our sort of network literacy and educational technology kind of group, and you kind of think that sometimes, I guess for me, I thought, well, maybe some of the innovation is just restricted in there. So it was really exciting to find out, no, here's an ag agent in Nebraska, and here's a food nutrition educator in New Jersey, and they're doing some of this kind of stuff as well, and a 4-H agent in Utah, and Paul Hill, and so it just kind of grew from there. And so we started doing as many interviews as I possibly could within the confines of my job and time and things like that. And it sort of ebbed and flowed over the last couple of years. Sometimes I do a rush of them, and you get maybe 8 or 10 of them in a couple months, and sometimes it gets really quiet. As subscribers know, it's been pretty quiet for a while now. But it's just I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to take up the whole time just monologuing here. So I think I answered your question. So that's basically how things came to be.
Yeah. No. How many have you done so far? Are you keeping a tally? You got marks on the wall or something behind you?
Yeah, there's 65 of them out there.
Wow.
Yeah. My old radio days, I have some habits from just being in radio. That's one thing that we do is programs are numbered very distinctly, right? Because when somebody calls and they're like, I was listening Saturday night at 4 a.m. and I heard this program and it was about something vague. You have to be able to go back and find that for them. And in the old days, yes, if some of our younger colleagues are watching this, there were days where we actually sent tapes to people and crazy things like that. I didn't just shoot them in MP3. And so we'd have to go back and find that kind of stuff and get it for people. So numbering shows is one of the things that I just am in the habit of doing. So I know the last one I did was Working Differently extension number 065. So that's how many are out there.
Yeah, we know the last one we did. It was last week.
Yeah, easy tally so far.
Well, I mean, nowadays, YouTube, especially with the Hangouts on air, YouTube does your archiving for you, so it's pretty easy to find them and what date they were broadcast and recorded. But yeah, so that's kind of nice.
Well, Bob, I mean, compared to your experience in radio and producing shows there, do you think it is? If I'm hearing correctly, do you think now the landscape in terms of the tools that makes it easier to do something like a podcast or kind of a?
Oh yeah, I mean it's so much easier, even from when I started doing it. So in a previous position at a small university, Mayville State University in North Dakota, I was involved in being an advisor and getting started an internet radio station for a student-run internet radio station. Even at that time, 10 years ago, something like that, I mean, just the equipment demands, server demands, things like that were just way, way different. And, more costly, more complicated, things like that. Now, basically, the way that this program's being done, and I do some Working Differently in Extension podcast using Hangouts on Air when I have a guest who, is familiar with them and can use them. It's as easy as that. You got a webcam, you've got a microphone or a headset, and use Google Hangouts on Air. Everything's archived for you on YouTube. If you want to stop there, in sort of a vodcast, that's an old early 2000s term. You can have your vodcast basically right there by people subscribing to your YouTube channel, and you're done. Mm-hmm. With the audio podcast, we do a little bit more to allow those subscriptions through iTunes and other tools as well. But yeah, it's super easy nowadays.
Yeah. So if you had somebody, maybe another extension educator out there that was interested in getting started, in doing a podcast, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about? Some of the tools that you recommend that they need to have set up, even maybe some of the processes that you go through. And I'm sure our processes are similar, but have a little variance.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I started, before Google Hangouts on Air were sort of a thing, when I started the podcast, I was thinking audio only. And how was I going to get connected with people? So that's a challenge right away. Even in my radio days, like how do I get somebody who's in California on the same recording as me? So we used to have phone transfers and things like that in the old days of radio. But when I started, the obvious way was Skype. So I used Skype. Most everybody was at least familiar with Skype, and even if they weren't, I could use Skype to call their phone and do a phone interview that way. And so in order to record Skype, I found a free piece of software. I think it's called MP3 Skype Recorder or something like that. I think if you search Skype, MP3 Skype Recorder, you'll find it, if that's not the exact name. And so what that allowed me to do is record my Skype phone calls as an MP3. And that's really the core. Like if you're going to do an audio podcast, you need to have that file, that audio file, because that's the way podcasting works. Right now, you guys who are watching, you're streaming this live. When you're watching it on YouTube, you're gonna be streaming it live, watching the recording, or streaming the recording. But when you're doing a podcast, that MP3 file actually goes to people. Onto their iPods or download on their computer or onto their phones. So you need that file. So that was important to me. So that Skype got me over that hurdle of how I was connect with people. And then the next step is, all right, so I have these files. I need a place to store them. So for sort of hobbyist podcasters or people maybe without as many resources as we might be connected to through our universities and other things like that, that sometimes is an issue. Like, where am I going to store this? So there's a lot of hosted environments, paid and free. You can put files on the Internet Archive for free, and some places to host those things. Luckily for me, here at NDSU, I just used our web space. So we have a content management system. I just uploaded them like I would upload any other file to our content management system. And then the third step is, all right, so the files are on the net somewhere. Now, how does somebody subscribe? So in order for them to subscribe and get delivered the podcast, which is important for my podcast because I'm super inconsistent. So if you've come back the last 10 weeks looking for a podcast, you're not going to find one. So when I do a new one, I want people subscribed so they get notified of that, get that delivered to their device. And so to do that, you need to have a feed, an RSS feed or an Atom feed. But some that's we refer to that on the web as the way we syndicate content. If you think of syndicated television, something started off in one place on a network, and then it got distributed to all different kinds of channels. So it's kind of the same idea. You take one piece of web content, like the MP3 in the case of podcasting, and then this feed allows it to be distributed across the net in an easy way. So I use Google's FeedBurner, which thank you, Google, for not shutting down FeedBurner. There's been some talk of that as Google likes to give us these great free tools and then decide to shut them down. But I'm still using FeedBurner to create my feed of MP3 files, and then also get that. FeedBurner has a feature where you can create a podcast-friendly feed, one that will work with iTunes. And so FeedBurner creates that feed for me, and I just then register that feed with iTunes so that it gets on the podcast quote-unquote store. And so then people can subscribe that way. They can also subscribe using other ways as well, Yahoo and Google, and but most people are in that habit of using. Well, I don't know that for sure. I haven't measured it, but a lot of people are familiar with iTunes, use iTunes if they have an iPhone, an iPod, those kinds of things. So having that iTunes feed is pretty important.
Very cool. Very cool. And I know for the other show that we basically do, you've been downloading the video to extract the MP3 to create a separate podcast, which is
right.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's what I do with the Hangout on Air as well. If I do that with working differently in Extension. So if I do a Hangout on Air, the video's out there on YouTube. I don't really have to worry too much about that part of it. But how do I get the MP3 into my podcast feed? You can download the videos that you upload to YouTube. You can download as an MP4, and that actually opens in my audio editing tool. I use Audacity, free open source tool. I think it's a great tool. I've always used it for many years and have always liked it. And it will just open the MP4, without the video. So boom, you have audio in Audacity, and then you just export it as MP3. I do a little bit of editing, sort of like our conversation here. I record working differently in Extension, what I call as live. Even if it's pre-recorded and we're not broadcasting on a Hangout on Air, we do it as live, unless there's a giant technical snafu or something. I don't stop the tape, so to speak. So I don't do a lot of editing of the interview themselves, but I do put some theme music on the beginning and end, a little intro that I might do, or an outro. And so I do a little bit of editing in Audacity anyway, and then export that as an MP3. So it's pretty easy.
Very cool. Hey, this is time to take a little pause, talk about Ask an Expert real quick. Ask an Expert's a service provided by eextension.org, where you can get one-to-one expert answers from cooperative extension educators and volunteers from across the United States. So far, approximately 200,000 questions have been asked since 2008 on topics ranging from food preservation to pruning and 4-H to social media. Do you have a burning question? Go to ask.extension.org to get your expert answer. So, just kind of shifting gears a little bit, there's talk about a new podcast renaissance. That podcasting started back in the 2009, 8, 7, somewhere around there. Took off because of iPods, and now it just kind of tapered off, and now it's seeing a jump again. What do you guys think about that? Where do you why and why is this a good thing?
No, it's terrible.
All right, moving on.
We need to restrict information and knowledge as much as possible. No, I think it's a great thing for exactly that opposite reason. Is that the more people out there producing content, the more points of view that are out there, the more ideas that are out there for people to learn from, build upon, and those kinds of things. I think that there's a couple things going on. One is the change in media. So things like Netflix that people will want for their TV shows, they can binge watch, they can watch on their own schedule, they can watch on demand. Radio's been trying to get to that for a long time. And there was talk, when I was in radio, even 10 years or more than 10 years ago that I was in radio, 15 years ago, of soon one day we'll have HD radio and we'll have digital radio and we'll be rewinding radio and the kind of stuff that we can do with our DVRs at home on TV, and that's really just never become, even in the cases where the technology has become possible, it's never become something that people do, because a lot of people listen to radio in their cars, and you don't rewind in your car, right? You have to drive and things like that, and so it's never really become a deal, something that the public has latched onto. So radio, corporations, radio stations have been trying to figure out how to get into that and meet that demand for on-demand listening and specialized channels and all that kind of stuff. And so it's really not coming through your radio at all. They just moved it to the net. So if you look at something like ESPN Radio, which is something that I listen to, on occasion, they're talking all the time about, hey, if you like what you're listening to, download our podcast. And so I think traditional radio is pushing that podcast angle. All the big national hosts have some kind of podcast or some kind of added value content that you can listen to online. So I think that's part of it as well. But also just the overall personalization of media. I think before we went on air, I think Jerry was talking a little bit about this, and I'll let him kind of pick up that point as well. But we've just become conditioned, probably because of the internet, to get our media in a very, very personalized way, and that's just a cultural thing. I mean, if you look at something like Fox News versus MSNBC, I mean, that's something that some of us talk about and are concerned about, this kind of filter bubble and information bubble where you only get stuff from that. But people obviously like that, right? CNN, whatever you think of CNN, whether you think they're really balanced or not balanced or whatever, but CNN sort of thought they staked out that middle ground between MSNBC and Fox News. Well, no one's watching it. Their ratings are nosediving, and Fox News and MSNBC are going up. Why? Because people like what they like, and they want more of it, and they want it personalized to them. So I think that's where podcasting, could definitely, might be one explanation for the podcasting renaissance, is that when you talk about audio or on-demand sort of newsy video or interview video, or the kind of thing that we're doing here, people are looking for that thing that is keyed right towards them, instead of mass media, which is keyed to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah. Well, I think as an audience, right, it's easier for, I think of myself as an audience in different kind of media, it's much easier for me through this kind of media, through the internet, to find something that I'm interested in very quickly, right? I'm not channel surfing until, I hit something that looks kind of fun or interesting. And I think people like that. And like you said, Bob, it's we've come to expect that, right? So now that not just information, just kind of text information is accessible. We now know that, hey, I can go and find something about this particular sort of subject that just fascinates me. And to key back into something you said earlier, hey, guess what? There's these other folks out here in the world that are also equally as fascinated about this stuff. And the podcasts and vodcasts and these sorts of things allow people of like minds, are really particularly interested in a particular topic, to find each other, right, and come together and kind of really kind of get into whatever it is that they're into. So I think that's another piece of it too, is that that the technology has allowed those kinds of connections that we find sort of gratifying, that we like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the technology piece is really the key. The fact that we can digitize content, and we have these devices. Steve Judd indicated there's a number of podcast catching applications for Android, but also listening. I use Pocket Cast on my phone, and I have a series of shows that I like, which talks to that convenience that I can binge listen to content, and I have a long drive coming up, and so certainly I'm going to be stacking up on podcasts, because I'm not necessarily happy with the radio that I listen to. I can have more control on what I want, but I think that switch, looking in this article from the New York Magazine, what's behind the great podcast renaissance, is they talk about the issue of technology, that initially Apple kind of controlled it with their iPod, and that was the idea, is download these shows, but now Android devices have the same capability. So and this mobile learning is increasing because of the convenience of having it anytime, anywhere, what we want. So the other thing they talked about in this article was really, it's about our cars, that our cars are becoming Bluetooth capable, that we can control the shows that we push to it, but we also still have these commutes, that people, well, North Dakota maybe not, and Laramie, Wyoming maybe not, but Chicago or Minneapolis a little more so, but we have these commutes, so we have these opportunities where we can sit for 20 minutes and listen to a podcast and listen to this. So I guess this kind of leads, how is this really beneficial to folks in extension? We're doing a 100-year anniversary, and through the research, there is folks doing radio shows all the time.
Well, I just want to point something out because the Steve mentioning the applications for catching podcasts, right? And we're talking about cars, and Bob had mentioned earlier, yeah, radio. People still consume most of the radio while they're on their commute or on their drive. Well, one of the things that's happening right now, we're right on the cusp of it, and it's occurring, is that automakers are looking at putting these kinds of platforms, whether it's iOS or Android, into cars. So it's not just going to be a broadcast device that you're playing with anymore, or having to hook up your iPod or your smartphone, right, to play through the speakers. This capability is now finding its way into current vehicles, and so when you're talking about opportunities, well, now there's conceivably you could have some webinar or some other thing that's being produced out of extension content, being consumed, right, and appreciated by people on their drive.
Yeah, I think that the whole idea of the user scenario is where the advantage might be for extension.
Mm-hmm.
If we are limited to sort of the mass media that we have used to communicate with the public for, less than 100 years, because we used to actually go talk to people, not just give them handout publications and things like that, and send them to websites. But if we get away from that, or if we're what I was going to say is, well, if we're limited by that, there's only certain user scenarios that you can fit yourself into, right? If you're going to read a publication front and back, you're not going to do that while you're driving. Some people do read while they're on the treadmill. I personally don't read when I'm on the treadmill or the bike or something. Maybe I'm just too uncoordinated or something. I'm afraid I'm going to fall off if I start reading a publication. And of course, if coming to meetings face to face, that's a whole nother thing. Or even watching a webinar. If you're like, well, I have my webinar out there, they can watch it anytime. Well, not really. You need to have sort of the time and space of that scenario to actually consume that. So something like podcasting fits into other user scenarios where we don't really fit very well. In the ag world, we sort of talked about, that the self-driving tractor, that between turns, there's some time there, and in big fields in North Dakota and out west where Stan is and stuff, there's probably quite a bit of time. You might be able to get 15 minutes, a half hour or something in before you have to get to the end of the field and make sure that the turn goes right. So that, how can we fit into that scenario? Well, podcasting might be one way to do that. We're working on a project here in North Dakota right now, trying to share some tips and some information with families who are overscheduled. Well, it doesn't make any sense to say, hey, come to a meeting and we'll tell you how not to be overscheduled. Yeah, they're already overscheduled. All you're doing is adding one more thing to their schedule. So we've talked about using podcasts as one of those things that mom or dad can, put it on the iPad and have it playing while they're cooking dinner or while they're shuttling kids to soccer or those kinds of things.
While they're shopping for groceries, podcasts for me have been a huge boon in terms of my experience when I go to do grocery shopping. It's really enriched my experience of that, of doing that chore. But I was just thinking, you got me thinking, well, what about, some of the content that, our folks in personal finance produce for folks? Wouldn't it be great if the audience that you're speaking to that could benefit from this is actually kind of learning this stuff about, well, how can you be a savvy shopper, as you're looking for groceries and this like, it's a moment for them right in that, right as they're engaging in that activity, for them to be learning, and it's kind of like that learning on demand. It's kind of right then when they're really concerned about it. So it's a great opportunity that's out there now.
Yeah, I do all my podcast listening while I'm walking the dogs. So it's about 2 hours, and I just back them up. So, but hey, time for another quick break, and then probably time to start wrapping this up. So, learn.extension.org. It's your free access to cutting-edge learning events. These professional development sessions are brought to you by eXtension and are open to anyone. Popular topics include finance, energy, social media for business, and many others. Many of the sessions are recorded for your viewing convenience. Look to learn something new? Then check out a session at learn.extension.org. So going around the room, anything that we kind of missed that you want to You definitely want a foot stomp dealing with podcasting.
Well, I just want to point out, that don't let sort of equipment concerns get in your way. I always have this big giant behemoth of a microphone in my webcam shot here. This is not a super expensive microphone, but you don't need this. A $30 USB headset, and you can do a podcast, record it on Audacity, a free piece of software, export it as an MP3. Even if you aren't ready to make it subscription, to set up the feed so people can subscribe to it, you can post it to a website, email it to people, whatever, and share it with people that way, so that you can kind of get going on it, get the idea of what you want to talk about, and how you want to share it, especially in an audio-only environment. And get used to that if you don't have experience in that. So don't let the equipment issues hold you up. There's definitely things you can invest in. If you want higher quality sound, USB microphones, big giant cans like Stan and I have on our head can sometimes be helpful, and those kinds of things. But yeah, don't let cost stop you. It's pretty low cost activity.
Well, Bob, I wanted to ask you too. We talked about this a little bit, before the show, but one of the things I always wonder about when I meet folks who are kind of out there, sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit, and I think I'm not aware of another podcast that anyone else in the extension is doing, or at least one that's been going on as long as the one you're running now. What makes me always curious is what do these folks who are creating these things kind of get out of it as professionals or personally? So I'm wondering you'd be willing to speak to that a little bit. I mean, what about this gives you a buzz?
Well, I think that you need to find that, right? It's what we talk about when we talk to people about blogging is you need to get out of that headspace of what am I trying to push out to people? What do I want them to learn? What do I want them to know? And sort of do it from a self-motivated point of view. I mean, for me, it's just when I do working differently in extension interviews, it's super energizing. It's like being at a conference and meeting somebody new and hearing about a new project that they're doing. You're like, wow, hey, that's great. Here's a smart person I just made a connection with, and they care about their job and they're passionate about extension, and it's incredibly energizing when you get that little rush. So I think all of us crave those conversations to talk with people who share new things with us and share some of our passions and interests, and so it's just an opportunity for me to do that. And if I wouldn't do it at all if it was prescribed to me. You must talk to these people, or you must talk to them about these subjects. Passion's so incredibly important in communication and education. I think it's something that we miss a lot of times in extension. We get bogged down in the list of things that we have to do, and just caring about what you're talking about makes you engaging. And so if you're thinking about doing it as an extension professional and you're trying to communicate with an audience about a particular topic, like Jerry mentioned, savvy shopping or something like that, don't do it from the bullet points from your extension publication. Like, do it from why you care about that, why you want to help people, what it does for them individually, for their family, and for their community if they are savvy shoppers, and be excited about that. If you're going to narrate PowerPoints or do the equivalent of that on podcasting, it provides another level of access, but I don't think it's going to engage people very much. So.
Very good.
Yeah. Oh, just what I heard in that, for as far as me, it kind of takeaway in what we're talking about here. It's something you had said earlier. I think it's a way. I see it as a way for us to be able to talk to people again, like we used to, right?
Right.
In that kind of really direct, immediate, and kind of personal way. That can be so effective. When when you are trying to develop ideas or teach or learn. So.
Yeah, learning is about dialogue. So,
Mm-hmm.
But our dialogue is coming to an end. So going around the table, what cool things are you guys doing? Bob, what do you got coming up, and what are you doing that you're excited about?
I don't know. You put that caveat of cool on there. It puts a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure on me to do that.
However you want.
Well, I've been working on a lot of projects here in North Dakota, and then involved in network literacy, community of practice, and network literacy is part of the Military Families Learning Network. We just got another award from the Department of Defense and Ed.D, so hopefully there's going to be lots of exciting things to work on there. I haven't talked to anybody about this, but you're putting the pressure on me, Stan, so I'm just going to share an idea. I mean, I've been taking little notes here and there, and on an idea of NetLit 365 tips for being network literate, daily tips. So maybe this is an opportunity for those who are listening, Steve, and Jerry and Stan. Maybe that's something that we could collaborate on and get some things out there. So that's what comes to mind. Sorry if that wasn't cool enough for you.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Jerry, what's going on?
Along the same lines. I mean, I think there's a few projects that I've got my fingers in that I'm kind of developing, and as mentioned earlier, I'm getting geared up for the conference in a couple weeks. And one of the major things I'm really excited about that's going to be a part of that effort, and others that I'm involved in, is in trying to nurture these kinds of connections that we're talking about. Utilizing the technology, kind of turning people onto it, and building those kinds of relationships so that people can kind of develop and grow and share ideas and get excited, about the stuff that they're really interested in. So I'm kind of, really excited and kind of geared up, getting in preparation for that.
Fun. And the next meeting I have just right after this is Extension Ed Technology Learning Network, and
cool.
I'm going to go talk to those guys, and really, probably the big news is my transition from Extension to Jamestown Community College, and all the excitement about that, crazy moving stuff, but ramping up and ramping down at the same time, so it's fun. But hey, this has been another edition of Extension Tech Roundtable with Stan Scrabbit and Jerry Butchko, with our guest Bob Bertsch, and it's been tremendously fun. Next time we'll get together with Beth Randy and talk about learn.extension.org. So, hey, thanks for being here, folks. And if you guys could hang on, that'd be great.
All right, thanks, guys.